Welcome everyone to our fourth Town Hall. We do appreciate your presence here and you do look very lovely tonight. I will start by giving some brief introductions so that you will get to know the panel that is before you. My name is Crystal Howell and I am an internal auditor and a member of the Thorne Commission. I'd also like to welcome the chairman of the Thorne Commission, attorney and MP Ralph Thorne. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of the Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Trade, Sandra Husbands. And at this time, I will give my fellow colleagues some time to introduce themselves.
Good night. My name is Peter Skeet. I'm a commissioner on this commission. I'm also employed in the Ministry of Youth and Community Empowerment as the Youth Commissioner for this constituency.
My name is Barney Gibbs. I'm really just here as a private citizen. I'm involved with the project Adopt to Stop, which is the community bus shelters, solar bus shelters that you see around the island.
My name is Mohammed Ali Nana. I'm a self-employed person. I'm also a member of this Commission of Local Governments.
I would like to extend apologies for the Deputy Chairman, David Comishon, the Ambassador to CARICOM. He sends his apologies for not being here. At this time, I would like to give a brief overview of why we are here. And this is to discuss the proposal that we have for the People's Assemblies on local governance. At this point, we have developed a structure. However, there's nothing that is set in stone. The purpose of these meetings and town halls is to get your input as part of the community as to how you would like to see the People's Assemblies move forward. Yes, we have developed the ideas, but we want to make sure that your input is heard and included so that it is something that is for us rather than something that we just give to you that you have no input in. The current proposal is for the People's Assemblies to measure, improve accountability in governance, engage people's participation, establish high standards in the public service, contribute creativity, intelligence, and energy to public affairs administration, deliver critical services to communities, protect neighborhood welfare, and participate in collective decision-making and administrative activities that are designed to foster social and national unity. The idea is that it would be a democratic, community-based, participatory governance structure based on voluntary, non-partisan services independent of government ministers. The current proposal is for there to be one assembly in the parishes of St. Lucy, St. Andrew, St. Joseph, St. John, and St. Thomas. The parishes of St. George, St. Peter's, St. Philip, and St. James will have 2 assemblies. Christ Church will have 3, and St. Michael will have 4, which would comprise a total of 20 assemblies. Each assembly will have an equal number of elected ex officio members, such as the Transport Board or the Welfare Department, parish residents, and youth from secondary and tertiary educational institutions. The elections would be organized by the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, and the candidates will provide CVs, and these curriculum vitae will in no way be academic or solely academic. The focus will be on your contribution to the community and to show how you will be able to add value to the People's Assemblies for the social welfare of the persons in the community rather than the academic contribution. The candidates will then be asked to address the town hall so that they can give persons an idea of what they will bring to the table, not just in writing, but an oral presentation, and electioneering is not permitted. The assemblies will last for a period of 3 years. Some of the proposed functions of the People's Assemblies include oversight of government agencies, community well-being teams, environmental protection or improvements, education, community development and sports, vendor licenses, community forums, planning permission, government development planning, and a people's cooperative. So you can see there are a number of areas that persons can lend their expertise to once they join the People's Assemblies. So at this time, hopefully you've had an opportunity to read the handouts, but if you have not, you can feel free to do so at any point in time, and you're also invited to follow the Facebook page for the Thorne Commission. At this time, I will give you a series of questions for you to think about so that you can offer your input, and I also will invite you after to give us your questions, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. Do you support a system of local government in Barbados? Do you support the proposal that each assembly must be non-partisan? Do you support the proposal for each assembly to have 30 persons? What do you think the minimum age for membership of a People's Assembly should be? Do you support the proposal that each assembly should comprise a mix of elected private persons who live in the geographical area, together with persons nominated from specific departments within the public service? Do you think that the nominated public servant should sit on the assembly in his or her capacity as a public servant or a private citizen? Noting that each assembly may cover more than one constituency, what do you think ought to be the relationship, if any at all, between the People's Assemblies and the parliamentary representative? Should sessions of the assembly be generally conducted in public? And finally, when would you wish to see a system of local government implemented in Barbados? At this time, I invite you to come to the microphone if you have any questions, queries, or comments. Say the youth shall lead them.
Good night.
You could give your name as well.
Yes, Khalil Kafdawala. I will address your questions that you front-loaded it with. I will intersperse my responses to those questions as I speak to you. But I would have written the Thorne Commission so some of my recommendations, which I will explore a little bit this tonight. But firstly, I think that I see here that you said it's not set in stone, these proposals, and I'm happy to hear that. But I just wanted to know how did you come up? How did the Commission come up with the formula for the number of People's Assemblies and how they will be distributed through the different parishes?
You mean the 20 that we're proposing for each one? This was based on a combination of ex officio members, private citizens, and tertiary and secondary school.
No, I mean in terms
so
of
the actual number 20.
Yes.
This was decided that this would be an appropriate number that would be able to address the issues that we have. Again, it's not set in stone. If some persons have been arguing for less, some have been arguing for more. So we will, based on the reasons given, we would then revise if we think necessary, if 20 seems to be too much or too little. Given the mandates which you would see for the functions within the People's Assemblies, if you divide it up by that amount, you have probably on average 3 persons addressing each area, which for some areas people might think might not be enough and some people might think might be too much. But we have been receiving a number of proposals and counter proposals, and the number has come up, and it is definitely up for revision if the information given is sufficient to say, yes, we should take this into consideration. What would you think would be an appropriate number?
I think that the number of councils of People's Assemblies themselves should be increased, and the number of people who sit on them should be decreased. So I thought that an appropriate formula, because if you are looking to democratize and to enhance the democratic gains in the public administration, I think that you want to keep the councillor to resident ratio as low as possible. So if you do it based on one councillor to, let us say, 400 residents. That produces 20 councillors in 30 assembly areas. And I say 30 because I don't know necessarily why we have the constituencies in place already. And I don't necessarily believe that we should move away from having the assembly. The boundaries for the assemblies, I believe, should be congruous to constituency boundaries. And that will allow us to do the 1 to 400 ratio. And when you look at other countries who have local government, they have higher ratios. So, for example, in New Zealand, I know that in some places they have one council to 17,000 people. But at the same time, you have with those systems, you have a more stratified system of local government. So they have wards, they have districts within these councils. But if we are going to just have this one particular council with these 20 members elected out of one body and not have that level of stratification, that level of sophistication, then we need to keep the council to elector ratio, I think, as low as possible. And 1 to 400 allows us that per constituency. So that then allows us 30 councils. And with the 20 constituencies, I don't necessarily agree that there should be 30 councillors. I believe that there should be 20 elected councillors, persons elected, persons who reside in the particular council, the council area. In addition to that, when you asked about whether the public servant should serve in a private capacity or in their role as public officers, I don't see why they should be serving as private citizens, personally. I think that, and that then feeds into my view that these public servants should be there not necessarily to vote, but should be there purely in an advisory capacity. So if it is that you identify certain government institutions from which these persons should join the People's Assembly, so you're having like the Welfare Department, Environmental Protection, Sanitation Service, National Conservation Commission, the whole set of them. I have quite a few, 11 listed here. That they might, depending on their role. So, for example, you might want the representative of the police force sitting at all meetings, but then another person, such as I don't know, in the Environmental Protection Department, for example, you might want to invite them to sit on one of the subcommittees of the People's Assembly, or invite them to particular meetings. When it comes to whether or not the meetings of the People's Assembly should be public, I definitely think that they should be. My view certainly is that if Parliament can operate in a public sphere, the local government council should be similarly able to do so. Of course, but what I would say is that if you have these councils meeting monthly, so let us say that, that they meet monthly, that those meetings should be open to the public. But more than that, perhaps, I know that I believe it is in Vanuatu in the Pacific, every 3 months they have a meeting of the local government council with the residents, and the residents are able to contribute their ideas, their opinions on the various plans and such like that the local government council will be pursuing. So of course I think that best practices, if we can identify best practices of the region and other countries with similar situations like ours, such as Vanuatu, a Commonwealth country, similar population, that would necessarily be a plus for us. I don't know if any thought has been given to how these councillors should be remunerated. My view, pardon?
That has come up as a discussion.
I would imagine it would have. My view is that they should be remunerated in a similar way to how members of statutory boards are. So they are paid per meeting that they attend. Not necessarily a fixed salary in my view, but that is open, I guess. In terms of constituting committees, I believe that I think you have it here in the proposed functions, the establishment of committees. I think that would necessarily be an important function, but more than that, you see that in other countries, so I refer to Vanuatu already, and in Dominique as well, they enable appointment to these subcommittees not only to be assembly members, but also persons who are not members but who are residents of that particular assembly area who would be able to sit on these, not in the assembly, but on these particular subcommittees. So I see that you have here one of them, the community well-being and the community development and sports, but then you can also have other ones I have listed here, public works, maintenance, beautification, economic development, culture, and the like. In terms of the sanitation and road pairs proposal that you have here at number 3 of the functions, certainly I would view that because we operate in a fiscally constrained space, and that the Prime Minister's indicated that these local government councils will not be, these people's assemblies rather, are not going to be raising rates for themselves or taxes, and that they will have to rely entirely, like the councils in St. Lucia, on government transfers. Operating in that limited fiscal space, the council should therefore focus on the mobilization, resource mobilization, and enabling rather the provision of services. So yes, certainly they can mobilize the community to do emergency cleanups, but my view certainly is that they should focus mainly on resource mobilization. And one radical idea that I have for that is not only are we going to look at the democratization through local government, but also the decentralization of certain functions of statutory boards through devolving those certain organized institutions, government statutory corporations as the National Conservation Commission, the like. So where you decentralize their function into smaller depots, say in the north, the south, the east, the west, central, however you wish to deviate up, as it were, and that decentralization allows for those councils who will be served by these depots to easier liaise with these particular institutions, government statutory corporations. So then, for example, it may be perhaps, I believe that the Sanitation Service Authority does that already to some extent with their depots, but furthering and enhancing that process of devolution, so it would be easier then for a local government council in Christchurch to liaise with the southern depot of whatever it is, the NCC, SSA, whoever it is, then it might be for them to liaise with the central government arm of that. So that is something that we can also look at when it comes to this whole push for decentralization. Another thought that I had is that the council, the People's Assemblies rather, should perhaps look to holding weekly or fortnightly, however you wish to do it, clinics in the constituency where they enable the residents of the particular area to come to this location, and then they can receive help. They can discuss certain problems that they're having. So I know that in England there's a private organization that does it, and it is the Citizens Advice Bureau. So then they would come to this clinic to receive free of cost certain, perhaps maybe legal advice, administrative things, so help with certain things. And certainly the assembly members can people those sessions, but also the university, the students who are Barbadian students who are going to the University of the West Indies will be called upon to do 150 hours of community service by the government as a way to repay the country, as it were, for paying the tuition. And it is my view then perhaps that those students could help staff and people those clinics. So for example, if you have a third-year law student who has to do his community service hours, he could utilize those in the clinics by offering legal aid, as it were, to those particular individuals. I don't know if you've looked at how monies might be transferred from government, or where that money should come from, rather. Like I see here that you have vendors' licenses, so I went through the estimates for the last financial year, and I was able to calculate some $2.2 million of revenue that the government collects, tax and non-tax, that could be allocated to various local government people's assemblies, rather. So then you have things like these vendors' licenses, so rent for public markets, the fees for the community centers, places of public entertainment licenses, those kinds of things. As I said, it's all there. So those details you would be able to see. And then one final thing, as it relates to the term of, well, not the term of office, but more so the election. When you say that electioneering is not permitted, how would you define electioneering? Because to some extent, addressing a town hall meeting would be electioneering to some extent. But I believe I understand what you mean. But that would need some clarification, especially if you're going to enshrine that in law, obviously. And then I wonder, has there been any discussion on how these individuals are going to be elected? Because certainly, as a country, we are firmly within the orbit of the first past the post-majoritarian system of election, and there's one certainly that has its merits, has its demerits, but first past the post obviously cannot work with elections where you are electing multiple members. But you have, there are three solutions to that: the single non-transferable vote system, the limited vote system, and the block voting system. Block voting and SNTV tend to be the most popular in countries that use FTPT for single member constituencies. But to my mind, limited voting is the best option. So now what is limited voting? Essentially, if we have 20 members who are to be elected, an elector is given the choice to vote for 10 people. And the 20 persons, much like first past the post, who receive the highest tally of votes are elected to council. To my mind, that is the best of the three options. Single non-transferable vote gives the elector one vote. To my mind, that is depriving that particular resident of a certain level of choice. So while we want to democratize, at the same time we would be taking away their choice, allowing them only to elect one person when there may be other persons who they may also be so inclined to want to see sit on the committee. At the same time, block voting allows you to vote for the same number of people as are sitting on the committee. And to my mind, that then goes to the other side of the spectrum, where persons are inundated with choice to vote for 20 people. So to me, limited voting for about half the number, about 10 or so, would be a compromise solution. It is very rarely used, but I know that it was used historically in England when there were university constituencies, and today it is still used in local government elections, to wit, in some states in the United States, so I think in Pennsylvania and Connecticut particularly, and as a matter of fact in Gibraltar, they use that as a method of election. I do believe that I have covered, oh yes, the one thing. In terms of the period of 3 years that the Commission, the People's Assemblies rather, shall sit for, to my mind, that should be a fixed term. I am not necessarily at one with the idea of having fixed terms nationally for national elections. That is something that I think that we need to have a greater conversation about. But in terms of at the local government level, the People's Assembly level, to my mind, the People's Assembly should sit for a fixed period of time, such that it allows them not to, as it were, fall prey to the arbitrary discretion of the particular sitting minister at the time. So that, briefly, are a few of my thoughts. I can't see anything else that I highlighted in this paper that I should mention, so I leave it there. I may not be able to stay for the entire evening, but I look forward to hearing the rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I'm seeing here on social media that you're 18?
16.
16? Okay. I definitely appreciate your comments. When I saw you in the crowd, I definitely knew we were in for some food for thought, and you did not disappoint. And we definitely will be looking forward. I haven't personally received your proposal as yet, but I have received a couple. So I look forward to seeing yours in detail. With regards to the financing, we have received, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados has volunteered to assist with ensuring that the budgets for the proposed assemblies will be monitored. And I definitely will be pushing, of course I'm biased, but I will be pushing for the Commission to engage in their services to give us that independent assessment that the funds will be spent appropriately. With regards to the use of the 20 versus the 30 constituencies, we were trying to move away from the idea that this was like elections, or to give it that feel that it was something political. We're trying to encourage a focus on it being a people's assembly rather than it being something constituency or politically colored, because there are persons who will see that and may feel as though it's another political thing and feel dissuaded from being able to participate. That was the reason why we were trying to move away from that. And I'm trying to remember some of the other things you mentioned. I will give my colleagues some time to comment while I look back at my notes for some of the areas you picked up.
Some would have indicated that 30 members are too little. I mean, you mentioned the fact that 30 members are too much. I think what the government is trying to do is to make this a voluntary arrangement, which means that the more persons that we have volunteering their services at the community level in an effort to provide service to the communities in which they reside, it is much better than limiting the number of persons to sit on the assemblies. We want to engage all, not only those who are from structured organizations. We want to engage members of the church. We want to engage young people, those who are considered to be marginalized, youngsters on the block, all areas of community life. We want to make sure that these persons have a voice. So to say that 30 members is a lot much, then we are limiting the amount of persons who we want to serve as members and to give back to the communities in which they reside.
Before I hand over to my other colleagues, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the former retired editor of The Nation, Mr. Eric Smith, and to thank you for the proposal that you would have submitted to us. I had an opportunity to read it, and I definitely appreciate the comments and the feedback that you would have given, and it will definitely be taken into consideration. We thank you for your effort made. I will pass on before I give my comments on your first past the post versus block versus single voting, because I'm sure that one of my colleagues, Mr. Deveron Bruce, he also has some input where that is concerned. But if you guys have any comments.
Sure. First, I want to thank you for your contributions, especially as a young person, because we haven't at these public meetings seen as great a participation from the youth as we would like, because one of the, I think, guiding principles behind these people's assemblies is to try to embrace or to encourage groups that may feel intimidated by the political process as it obtains right now. So that would include youth, non-nationals, visible minorities, etc. So I also really liked your suggestion about involving people from UE, students from UE, and maybe even secondary students as well, because I believe that some of the secondary schools, Queen's College included, demand a certain amount of community hours per semester or term. So there may be scope even for secondary students to participate in that way as well. In terms of the size of the assembly, sometimes I myself struggle with conceptualizing or picturing what 30 people in a room would be. So I just counted, and I think there are about 50 people in the room tonight. So that would give people an idea of what 30 would look like. And it seems to me that that is a manageable amount. It's sort of well-sized for the type of spaces that people would seek to meet. But also, and I think you may have answered your own question in a sense when you mentioned about the subcommittees and the way to broaden the participation using subcommittees as a instrument. So that would be my contribution for now.
Yes. Well, first of all, I think you should be here instead of me. Anyway, yes, I like what you were saying about having consultations on a weekly basis. That's on different matters, maybe legal, maybe medical, whatever. But the assembly, actually, the commission also have a space where we're having. We want to have every 3 months or so forums where people can come and voice their opinion on national affairs of the country, that they can be able to say what's happening in the country, and obviously it will be recorded, and it should be will go back to the government. But one of the main concerns of the commission also is that there's a disconnect between the people and the government. There's a big disconnect. The people feel that they are not really part of the government. And one of what the Assembly is trying to do is to get the people to feel be part of the government. So the Assembly and the setting up of this commission to have this Assembly is to get the people to come forward, especially when we're having the members of the commission of the Assembly from within the community, and they know better about what's happening in committee. Right now, the MPs themselves, obviously, they have a big job on their hands already, and what's happening, the agencies that they are not coming to the fore. Either they are lacking in services, and this way we feel that the assemblies should be able to deliver and to look after the people of the communities. But you made a very good contribution, so I think it should be definitely be recorded.
What I would also like to add is that I appreciate how prepared you came tonight, and you actually, in my opinion, was the most prepared participant for any of the assemblies we've had so far. And I made that point because I know there was also a lot of discussion regarding the age for participation, and I think you set a very good example as to why we should not have it limited necessarily to 18 years. The passion and the insight you have outweighs many adults in this country, to be very honest, and I don't think that that should be excluded with the kind of contribution and value that you can offer. I will, at this time, I know Devron's been waiting for a bit, so I will give you an opportunity to speak.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'm going to congratulate the young gentleman again for what was an excellent presentation that I know how to follow.
They're intimidating.
Just a bit. But local governance, we are essentially trying to initiate political reform in our country. And if you're going to reform a political system, then you have to look decades into the future. Not 1 decade or 2 decades, but decades into the future when you're looking at political reform. When we look at the last 2 decades, the most influential thing that has been occurring in our societies globally has been the rise and really the proliferation of digital technology and most recently social media. If we want to reform our governance systems, I believe that the Thorne Committee needs to take a serious look at a social media policy. Because I look at the demographics of this room, and not against anyone, but I would have expected that it would have had persons like myself, persons like the young gentleman from QC, and a younger demographic. What we need to do is to begin to go to people where they are. I know this is being streamed online, but that it has its tokenism towards it. What we really need is a system whereby you can facilitate genuine involvement of people, not only for mobilization reasons and not only for participation reasons, but really to source the knowledge in our societies, to source the expertise in our societies, and to source these experiences of people to solve our own problems. Because we've been relying on the political system for the last 50 years, which has been overly centralized, overly hierarchical, and it has not delivered in the way that it can. We need to be our own solution to our own problems. And the only way you can do that is by getting to people where they are. We now have the technology in our hands. We now have the platforms in our hands to do this. So where is the Commission's approach towards engaging people via this technological approach? We can't talk about reform in the 20th century without having a serious look at that issue. That's the first contribution I would make in summary. Secondly, I was reading the proposal, and it spoke to the fact that Barbados finds itself in a precarious situation due to the, I wouldn't say absence, but the insufficient participation of people. One of the concerns that I have that is absent on here is the matter of integrity. So we have a situation whereby our economic systems, our political systems, a whole set of systems are threatened by the absence of integrity, regardless of political administrations, regardless of political governance. Regardless, we've been hearing about integrity legislation since the 70s, for goodness sake. It's not been here, it's not arrived up to now. So you have a situation now where this presents an opportunity where now we can bring people together to solve that issue at that level. So you have, for instance, the government proposing the Integrity of Public Life Bill, which forms a commission, an integrity commission. They're talking about an anti-corruption unit. They're talking about public meetings for these state-owned entities. Those individuals ought to be part of the People's Assemblies, or at least there needs to be a link between People's Assemblies and the institutions in our society that deal with matters of integrity, whether it is public outreach, whether it is public education that individuals understand how these things impact on their lives, whether it is having official links between those entities to solve the problems again, whether it is the creation of a whistleblowing system that the assemblies can assist with, whether it is workshops. There are a whole host of areas that we can bring people together to solve some of those issues regarding the matter of integrity. I would also address the matter of politics and partisan politics in particular. This is more a conceptual issue than it is structural, but it's a bit of both. So the goal of the commission is essentially to have a local governance system that is not governed by partisan politics. Fine, I agree with that. But we must recognize that the local governance system operates within a political structure and system that is highly partisan. So how do you have a parliament that is structured to be partisan, a cabinet that is structured to be partisan, media outlets that are highly partisan, political culture that is highly partisan, and then all of a sudden we're going to come in a room, call it local governance, and we forget all about these structures, we forget all about this culture, we forget all about the things that have made our understanding of politics one that is partisan. It is not going to happen like that. So before we talk about local governance, we need to look at national governance and how do we make it less partisan and more conciliatory and more engaging and more participating from persons of opposing views. That is where we have to start at the national level. And then we have to look at the legitimacy of decision making as well for the local governance system, because quite frankly, I may be young, but I've been observing politics since I was 9 years old, and I have been seeing, for the most part, talk shops. The same discussions I've been here for the last 20 years are still ongoing. And that is for a reason, because the decision makers in Barbados, again, rest in cabinet, rest in parliament, rest in a very hierarchical system. So how do we dismantle that system in a way where we actually have legitimacy in decision making? There's no absence of good ideas in Barbados. There is no absence of skills. There is no absence of expertise. The issue exists that we leave our country to be governed by 30 people. It cannot work. So how do we bring people together in a way where decisions can now be legitimately made by these people's assemblies? How do they link that? That is one of the major concerns that I have. And finally, how do we protect the local committees from the national system? In the sense that quite often, well, we've already done it, we've politicized a whole host of issues in our society that should not have been politicized to begin with. Issue-based politics, whether it's trash, whether it is transportation, whether it is whatever problems we have at the community level, these are community issues that have become highly partisan and highly polarized at the national level. That is a problem. So when you have a constituency, or wrong word, a local governance system, where you come together and begin to speak about roads, and begin to speak about transport, begin to speak about garbage, it is already a partisan issue. It is already problematic when you start talking about these issues. And then now you have a central government who will essentially feel as though these local committees are now challenging them, are now a problem for them, because they're going to make them appear unpopular and increasingly unpopular if they talk about the issues that we continuously be talking about that have not been solved. And the nature of our politics is to silence opposition. The structure of our politics is to silence opposition, is to undermine opposition. So the same way that you will have local communities coming together talking about these issues, I can foresee, maybe not this administration, maybe not the next one, but some administration trying to undermine local governance because it is making them unpopular. And they have their own objectives. So how do we protect our local governance systems from the national governance system that will likely try to undermine it when it goes against the grain? So that is my contribution. And as far as the political structures and systems and the electoral systems in particular, there are a whole host of them. Pick three, figure out which one will be the best.
Thank you for your contribution. With regards to the digital penetration, I would invite you, so that my voice is not the only one advocating for this for the Commission. I also believe it's important to recognize how much a digital platform can impact the way that we do things in Barbados, and to be able to hear a voice outside of the one concentrated voice that would attend forums such as these, and to recognize that just because you will not come to a town hall does not mean that you have any less interest in participating in local governance. With regards to the integrity legislation, as a fellow member along with yourself for Integrity Group Barbados, this would also speak very highly to me. We will continue to advocate heavily for this administration to implement integrity legislation, and at this point I will also take the opportunity for every Barbadian to heavily advocate for integrity legislation, as it impacts everything we do in Barbados, everything. With regards to the partisan issue, at this point in time, it's not that we're ignoring it. We do recognize it. We recognize it's already started to be an issue, as we expected. What we have to do is to see how we can manage it, other than having persons like myself on the Commission who have a big mouth and will talk about it happening when it does. So this is something that we are still amongst ourselves discussing how best we can manage it, because of all of the things that you would have highlighted. We do acknowledge you can't have the kind of structure and culture that you have in Barbados and then expect this to be immune from it. But recognizing that that is a problem, we then will focus on how we can best manage it so that everyone can feel as though they can participate because even for myself personally, it is very distressing to realize that every single thing or problem you want to address in Barbados leads back to the road of politics, which is not something that every Barbadian is willing to be involved in just to have things in their community changed. So that is definitely something that we have to give some serious thought to. I will give my colleagues an opportunity to comment as well.
Devin, I want to echo your comments regarding the necessity to leverage technology in this whole process. I think your first point would mitigate the problems that you identified in some of your later points. I mean, I don't know, what is it that the young people say there's an app for that? And there may well indeed be an app that will help to facilitate this whole process. On a much smaller scale, I'm involved with a community group where I live, and we've been just having WhatsApp in the last couple of years has made communication among the 30 or 40 of us, much easier. So if you can extrapolate that over a whole assembly area, using some technology, you can see where that kind of citizen democracy would start to emerge. So you have some people on the assembly who very much are pushing for that.
Well, we've had two reasonably good presentations for the night.
From young people, by the way.
But this assembly is not only here for us to hear concerns on what the general public believe is not being done. We're here for the public to also offer solutions as well, and ways in which you see the ineffectiveness of the government, how you as Barbadians want to see some of these problems solved.
Could you give us your name?
My name is Alvin Brooks. The two former speakers, when I heard about this People's Assembly, I'm here tonight to try to learn what was the conceptualization of it. And the bare fact of the two previous speakers proves the point that we need the People's Assembly. Because with the type of dialogue, I'm not only going to say coming from the youth, because the youth are very important because they're the leaders of tomorrow, but it shows that when you broaden the decision-making process and broaden the opportunity for people to be empowered, I think that is where we as a nation need to go. I'm going to start off by, you had indicated a number of questions. I'd like to make a suggestion. Can you have those questions in a format? Because when I start to write down 1 or 2, I miss 4, 5, and 6. So if it was in a format that we can return with you, which I have no doubt they will all be yes, yes, yes. I think that will give you a very good understanding. And why not possibly use the Nation newspaper and ask them to put it so that you just tear off from the newspaper and send it back to you. That would give you not only the viewpoint from persons at the People's Assembly, but that would give you an opportunity to canvass the entire country as to their views, the relevant questions that you have asked. The proposed structure. I've seen you have one assembly for St. Lucie, St. Andrew, St. Joseph, St. John, and St. Thomas. Wearing a different hat, I would like to suggest that why is it the topography of these parishes may lead you to have more than one assembly. Because when you look at hazards and the topography and what can come with the terrain and also the other unique characteristics of these parishes, I do not think that 20 persons will be suffice to cover this large geographical area. The only point I have to disagree with my first speaker when he said he would like them to be aligned along the constituency boundaries. Now the constituency boundaries, for argument's sake, this is St. James South and over here is St. James Central, okay? Mm-hmm. Services and the whole gamut of what happens are unique to these two areas. Now there will be, even if you go along the parish lines, you're still going to get that, but it's going to be significantly reduced. Because part of the problem that currently exists in the sphere of disaster management is that we have these little units that are so aligned to a road. So I'm over here and I can say, Peter, boy, you're in my constituency, so I don't got to worry with you. But the same water pipe serves here and there. And the same road connects here and there. So I just think that we should come up with an appropriate form that can encapsulate that type of unity of approach to the services that you are likely will have complaints coming from. We live in a country where we say that tourism is everyone's business. I would like to see the day come where we have, and I think that this assembly can be a catalyst in driving another philosophy, in that community resilience is also everyone's business. A couple of weeks ago, we had the misfortune of losing electricity for 2 days. How many persons in this room was affected? How many persons island-wide was affected? The point which I'm making is that right now there is not enough opportunities because disaster management has to start in the communities. It cannot no longer be driven by the Department of Emergency Management or a Minister of Home Affairs or by the Prime Minister. And while I will commend the efforts that are being made now, we now have to see how we can mobilize the respective communities and show them, train them, if they so desire, and I know they will be, with the concepts and how they can take charge, because I see this People's Assembly being empowering people to take charge of their respective communities. I'm saying let us push another disaster management and community resilience within this portfolio, because the day is coming when we will be impacted and we will not do as well as many of us would expect. And therefore the concept of community resilience is also everyone's business. My last 2 points. I agree with your, in the introduction, I would like you to answer these 2 questions. You say you're going to improve accountability and governance. And that is in 1, and in 6, you say you're going to protect the neighborhood welfare. Whereas I may have some ideas on how you may perceive this to be done, can you elaborate a little bit more on how you are going to improve the accountability and governance? Because the former speaker also tapped indirectly in this, because we know right now that everything is partisan. I don't do anything because my party is not in power. So I'm going to wait till when my party in power comes in before I do something. So we all in here would like to see an improvement in accountability in the governance. Can you tell me how these People's Assembly propose to do that? And when we talk about protecting the neighborhood welfare, exactly what are you referring to? Because welfare in community work is a very wide area. Okay? So those are my comments today. Thanks.
David, you may have to go over there if you want to ask the question, because there's a line. Just in response to the comments provided with regards to protecting neighborhood welfare, the wider mandate had some more details where that was concerned. We wanted to make sure in particular that persons, the elderly, the disabled, the young persons within the communities were not left behind. So we wanted to make sure that under the community forums and the community development and sports programs in particular, that they were used to make sure that these particular vulnerable groups were not at a disadvantage and were included in the protection under the People's Assemblies. And based on the areas that are developed, we want to make sure that that is included. With regards to improving accountability in governance, the question that would have been proposed with regards to whether these forums should be public, that is part of the accountability. The push to make sure that the Auditor General's Office and even the assistance of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados will help to make sure there's accountability in how the funds are used. And I will make it my personal effort to make sure that there are sufficient controls in place to avoid the misuse or mismanagement or wastage of funds. This is again why I am pushing for the ICAB's involvement, because I know they can greatly assist in this area, and we don't want any more taxpayers' dollars to be wasted or for the commission to have the reputation of taking the money and not using it efficiently or effectively. So those are just some of the proposals, but we also welcome your input as to additional accountability measures that you would like to see in place, because as we keep emphasizing, this is not just for us to give you our ideas, but to receive your input as to how you would feel best represents accountability for this commission. I don't know if my colleagues have any comments? Okay.
Just speaking generally, in terms of protecting community well-being, if we accept the principle that he who feels it knows it best, or she who feels it knows it best, it stands to reason that if the persons in the assembly area can liaise, as the gentleman said, more directly with the service providers, whether they're centralized or decentralized, we should get a better result.
When you come to the microphone, can you please remember to state your name?
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, a comment before I make a suggestion. Wilfred Beckles, sorry. I live in this area. I'm 84 years old. I've had 7 jobs. And it's from the point of view of a bureaucrat that I want to speak this evening. First comment, national anthem. Next time we have it, let us sing it. I agree with Professor Fraser, if we reflect on those words as we sing, a lot of change will take place.
I apologize because I've had that suggestion before, so I apologize for not implementing it for this meeting.
Now, from the point of view of a bureaucrat, I'm looking at the first page, improve accountability and governance, just recently raised. Establish high standards in public service, number 3. Deliver critical services to communities, protect neighborhood welfare. And I want to pose the question and then follow it up with my reasoning. The question is, since resources will be very limited to these assemblies, and since authority also will be limited, what will be the mechanism between these bodies and the central government that will ensure accountability. In other words, when the assemblies meet and make recommendations or decisions or whatever, how are they going to be sure that A, they get a hearing, B, that they get a fair hearing, C, that the hearing is followed up with a decision or implementation, or 4, that if no decision is made, or if the decision is adverse, that feedback is given with reasons why it cannot be. And until we get that millennium when local government becomes truly local government, we are going to be faced with this link between central government and the assemblies perpetually. And the reason why I raise this is because I have 3 instances personally why I am at the position where I regard attitude and lack of service as our main problem. True. Whenever I say to a security guard, so, that's above my pay grade. Whenever I go, if I go to NIS, for example, and I'm sitting with a gentleman using the computer, and the computer shows up Chinese rather than, I say to him, why can't you call your tech people? He says, I can't do that, above my pay grade. That's one attitude. The second one is that earlier this year, I had occasion in a public forum with an NGO, which shall be nameless, to make a proposal that was accepted by the body with deadlines for action. The first deadline has gone, and I have heard nothing, and the members have heard nothing about what action, if any, has been taken. That's the NGO. And then there is an agency, again nameless, which promised by October that there will be decisions about finances and investment and so on. October has passed, went to December, and they have not bothered to keep the people involved abreast. I had occasion recently this year to approach the Ministry of Health through the polyclinic, Sir Winston Scott, about debushing in a particular area. That area is a watercourse that has been filled in and has been used for building. Inevitably, the building collapsed. Therefore, the owner has no interest in developing that area, and it's grown out of hand in bush. Result, rodents, infestation. Result, burglaries in the area. I approached the Ministry of Health in the usual way. I approached the Ministry of the Environment, the office. I approached the constituency office. They all know who is involved and what is involved. Nothing happened. Recently, we had 2 instances, community instances, one resulting in 3 deaths. Today, I had a discussion with some members, and the feeling was, the police can do nothing. They haven't the authority. They haven't the resources. In other words, I asked, why couldn't there have been intervention earlier at a community level? Answer, that is the law. They can't intervene. Problem. Now, if I take, therefore, all I've said and relate it to page 2 of this document. First, the first paragraph, the business of the finances, even if, as was suggested earlier, there's devolution, there's still going to be the question of what resources will the assemblies have. The next issue would be provide status report to the public under oversight. Question, how can you provide status reports to the public if you don't get a report from the people themselves whom you have approached? The third issue I would raise is the assistance to elders, disabled persons, and so on. We had an instance recently, and I asked the question to myself, where is the ombudsman in Barbados? Does he or she still function? Would an intervention by the ombudsman have prevented the old lady's plight? I don't know, but I'm saying there is a problem of attitude, service, and until we deal with that problem, no matter what assemblies we set up, we will have a problem, continuing problem. The question of education, number 4, my feeling is, like Senator Adams, there should be neighborhood schools where the community is involved in the school. Therefore, you go to school in the neighborhood rather than run from Christchurch to St. Peter. And the community is therefore involved, so the parents can come to the PTAs, the parents can help if there are problems, the parents, the guardians, and so on can be involved. In other words, there's community involvement. Let me return back to page 1 on the question of the student representation. My math isn't good. I'm not certain about the arithmetic. Because if there are 10 students from UWI, and 5 from BCC and SJPP, and 10 students on each assembly, how many schools do we have? When you multiply all the totals, what do you get? And how do you spread them across the assemblies? And my comment on that also is this, the business of community hours. I don't know who is going to keep check of community hours put in by individual X, Y, Z. I like the Governor General's idea of 1 year's community service by everybody, regardless, at a particular age. Even if, and not wait till you come back, if you go away, do it before you go away. And even at the primary school level, now we're talking about 15-year-olds, but I'm talking about the primary school levels. If in fact the school-based assessment at primary school level were on community activities, intergenerational activities, we would start even at the primary school with community involvement, and even they should be considered for membership. I left primary school at age 12. Lastly, Madam Chairman, I see the reference to planning permission on page 3, government plan development, and I see the words can, and can. And I wonder at what point we go into the word shall. Why? I live in Paradise Heights. When Town and Country Planning gave permission to UW, we first of all developed the area in front as a park. When Town and Country Planning gave permission to UWI to use that area, nobody was consulted. There was no consultation whatsoever, and I'm wondering at what point it becomes mandatory for government agencies in certain instances to consult, especially with people's assemblies. Thank you, ma'am.
The word can was used because at this point everything is a proposal. This is what we would like to happen, but without your input at this point it is a proposal. And once we have the input from all of the town halls and we've been asked to come back to certain areas as well, that's when you would likely see the word shall. And this will be passed through with legislation once the final proposal has been put forward, so that everything that we have would become legislated. So I hope that answers that question. I've been asked to request that Mr. Eric Lewis make an oral presentation. Pardon? Sorry, Eric Smith, sorry. I just saw his name pop up. Apologies, so his name was in my head, but Mr. Eric Smith. We hope that at some point tonight that you'd be willing to give an oral presentation for the proposal that you would have submitted, so that persons would have the benefit of hearing your ideas. And we would also like to make it clear that your words of wisdom were very welcome. I'd also like to, at this point, acknowledge Minister Ford, under which our People's Assembly is structured under her particular ministry. So thank you for your presence. You look very lovely today. I'd like to welcome the next person.
Good evening. I'm Ann Harding, and thank you for letting me speak. And I pray as well that I'll be understood, make myself understood. First of all, I want to say congratulations to not just people on the commission, not just the commissioners, but everybody in this whole room. You should give yourselves some applause just for being here, right? Yay. Thank you so much. And also thank you for using the technology to use the video, because I was able to review 2 previous ones that you had. And that helped me to understand, plus the online presentation of, I believe, this document that you've handed out tonight. So I think that that helps a lot. So congratulations on the inclusivity, and also for the goal of being nonpartisan. It reminds me of a gentleman who said to me, I was program manager at the Future Center Trust, he said, do you know that we have the world's first zero waste cinema? And that kind of blew me away because I thought, wow, everybody thinks zero, including myself, zero waste is so hard. How do you do that? It's easy. We just made it part of our mandate from the very beginning, and then every time we had to make a decision, we just held it up against, was it zero waste or not? And it was easy. That's all you do. So you just, if you have a mandate, if you lay it down and you say it's non-partisan, then you just weigh things up against that as you go. And so congratulations. And my main point that I wanted to make, thank you so much to the gentleman who spoke before me, because he eloquently expounded on that, so I don't have to go into it, but I'm just wanting to ask, what is central government's responsibility to the assemblies? I think that's really, really, really important. Why do this? Otherwise, it's just what somebody else said, hot air. You know, if we don't actually have a way to get action, to get a response, and it needs to be, like you said, legislative, so that pretty much takes care of that, because the responsibilities listed in the functions, and here, these 10 functions, that's a huge amount of responsibility. So, yeah. So I wonder what actual outcomes are expected, and how are they enabled? Right? This is part of, how is central government, how do they come to play with this, and what are the responsibilities that central government has to the assembly? Okay, and then structures. You mentioned monitoring, reporting, long-term plans, and you mentioned inclusivity. You're working towards inclusivity. So with the structures, are each one of the assemblies left to come up with their own structures, or are they assisted by the commissioners, so that there's a uniform and also a synergy formed between the assemblies, so that I think the number one advice I would give, I would say, don't expect to be perfect. Be fluid, be dynamic, take feedback, and just grow it, go with it, and that's how, because you won't be perfect. Don't expect that, or you'll just kill yourselves. So, I'm wondering, how independent is each council? And by the same token, how can inter-council synergies be enabled by these overall structures? That's really important to me, the synergy between them. I think that a lot can be gained if you have proper structures that enable these councils. Okay, just two more quick things. Volunteers. I don't know how many people in this room have been responsible for managing volunteers. Could I have a quick show of hands? How many people responsible for managing? Not a whole lot, but I can tell you one thing right now. Volunteers are wonderful. Look at Barney Gibbs there. Director of the Future Center Trust for 10 years as a volunteer, and does amazing work, right? So, but he's a rare gem. And volunteers, the main point about them is their situations change. For example, they can get a promotion and not have time. Or there can be an illness in the family, they have to go look after something. There's lots of reasons, but the situations change. So this 3 years, I think, is unreasonable. I don't have any problem with the 30, and I think that your talk, especially David's points in St. Lucie about inclusivity, how each one of these councils needs to make sure they include a lot of other volunteers. They need to get people included. That's a really important thing. But and I've only got one more tiny point, is I don't think you need to worry about a minimum age. If you're going to do elections, let that sort itself. I don't think you have to say, oh, you're too young to be a member. I don't think you have to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. With regards to structure for the councils, because that came out, I believe, at the St. Lucie Town Hall, we don't want persons to feel as though that they'll be left on their own to figure out exactly how these things are going to work. And the discussion has started around what staff will be assigned to assist the assemblies. We've also been forewarned that experience with working with persons in the public service may not go as we expect. And we want to make sure that we are adequately prepared for that as well, and that we have a cohesive relationship with the persons that we will be meeting with and having discussions with within the government agencies, so that we are not ignored. And that is the whole point, that there's so many different community groups and areas that have been doing some of these things, but to be able to move forward and make it a more comprehensive package, they need to be able to get the support and the structure and the finances and everything else to make sure that no one is left behind in any of the communities, or that it's not only if you know some person that you'll be able to get the assistance that you require. So that's what we're hoping that these people's assemblies can achieve. And the issue of culture is very important, because if we do not recognize how much culture can impact a lot of the things that we want to do for these assemblies, we will be very unprepared for the reality of what is going to happen when this actually comes to light. And we have to make sure that we have a proper strategy to address how we would get persons to cooperate with the persons on the people's assemblies, and not just see them as another part of their job that they don't want to do, but something that they can feel as involved with and be willing to participate along with us. So, at this point, I am seeing everybody pointing at the chairman, and he is pointing at the next person, so I will pass on to the next. I'll pass on to the next person, and we'll have his comments.
Madam Chairman?
Pardon?
You didn't want to recognize me?
Of course I want to recognize
I thought
you.
you did it.
Please, give your name for the audience.
Oh, okay. I know that you recognize me. I'll give my name. My name is Grafton Cobham, and I want to speak on just 2 points. First of all, the point about political propaganda, and second point is the point on politics, party politics. Now, you got to understand that Barbados gained tremendously from an agreement signed by Canada, where Canadian companies could come in here, set up the headquarters, and they are taxed at 1 or 2% in Barbados, and then repatriate those profits back to Canada and do not be taxed. And that arrangement was made between Canada and Barbados only. And because of that, many Canadian companies came into Barbados, and the international business sector grew to the point under the Owen Alpha administration, it was bringing in $350 million a year. But what happened in 2008? In 2008, the Canadian government changed the system, and rather than give it to Barbados only, extended it to other Caribbean countries, who at that time had a tax rate of 0%. Some of them had 0% corporation taxes. So obviously the Canadian companies moved out of Barbados to take advantage of a lower tax regime. And what it meant is that over the last 10 years, there was a whole of $250 million left in the Barbados finances. And that hole is still there. And Barbados got to understand that that is. Now, the political propaganda I hear all the time from you all, others, about 10 years of lost decade, let the people know the truth. That is what the problem is. That is the fundamental
Mr. Cobham?
Of Barbados.
I just wanted to see if I want to understand if your point is relevant to the people's assemblies, and yes, I do want to give everybody an ear.
It is very relevant. It is very relevant because that hole is still there. That hole is still there.
That is going down a line.
And therefore, you have to let Barbados know that what you have to do.
I don't think that the line that you're going down is appropriate for this forum.
No, I am clear on this. Yes. I am getting to it, you know.
You have a very short leash to get to your point.
I said I made 1 point about that. The other point I want to make now is the point of party politics. I like the idea of having a people's assembly. That is something came out from CLR James long ago. Taylor John suggested that we should have people assemblies
It got lost.
and not political parties. Right? But I am saying you cannot have, as the youngster said, or somebody said it here again, a party trying to set up a political assemblies, and then above there, you have politics, party politics above. So I am saying that you have to therefore decide whether you have to eventually self-destruct the parties. The party will have to self-destruct so that from the People's Assembly, you move upwards into what I would call a board of directors of Barbados. And that is what you need to do. Right?
Okay, thank you for your
Right.
comments. Hi, just give your name.
My name is Kwasen. Kwasen. They call me Q because I'm always in the community doing things. I do mobile cinemas. I go to fellas on the blocks. I do programs. So they call me Q.
Welcome, Q.
Thank you. This is my first town hall meeting as well. I don't normally attend these kind of things, but I wasn't sure what the assembly was all about. I was part of a constituency council before. I like the term constituency council that was supposed to empower people. But when I joined, I gave them right, because every meeting, there was nothing to empower people. They were paying people bills and so forth, and I was against that. Let's empower the people. If you guys want to empower people, I am with you. Okay, so local governments is definitely there. 2 questions, and then a few comments, and that's it. The simple first question was the term assemblies as opposed to council. To me, council is more local. Assembly has this politicking kind of a thing to it. Parliaments and assemblies and so forth, right? So you can also explain perhaps why you chose assemblies over the word councils. Now, the first question. Second question is in relation to number 5, the community development and sports. You mentioned that, for example, the NCF can oversee community development, sports, cultural programs for community centers and so forth. And my question is, if they're overseeing it, again, it is not local, it is not community-based. So my question is, how is this local government with people empowerment and self-determination? To me, the people should oversee their own community programs, and we should find resources within the communities to collectively, to control the communities collectively, and to train the resources in the communities to sustain the community. In other words, you go into communities and you find resources within the communities, people that have degrees and so forth. In my young age, I just went back to school. My young age, finished my master's in health and wellness with a concentration in gerontology. I used to always work with the elderly. Was in China working with the elderly, came back here as well. I'm doing programs, but the thing about it is this: you must go into communities, find the resources that can manage their own community. So you can't come from a top down, not come from bottom up, all right? The question is, what is a community? And really and truly, we don't have communities, right? So first, I said we need to reinstate love to reform the community, because there's no love in the communities. People killing one another left, right, and center. There's no respect for parents, no respect for people. So love must be reinstated to really reform what we call community. And then after we reinstate this community concept, then we must stimulate motivation, because we need to motivate the young people. I go to fellows on the blocks, they're hanging out, and we need to motivate them. So that is my second question, which is, how is this local government pertaining to that issue there where people are managing themselves? So those are my 2 questions. Now my comments. Protecting the neighborhood welfare. I come from a military background as well, so when you mention the word protect, I would look at the word training men to protect the community. It is the man's role in all the scriptures to protect the community. If you can't protect your community, your woman, your children, everything goes by the wayside, right? So we need to provide men's training programs, right? And I was born here, but I'm what you call returning national. I grew up in Brooklyn. We closed down crack houses. I'm gonna tell you, I mean, we went, say, listen, when they can't sell the drugs, but here, that's it. And they said, who's y'all? We came back 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 people. Crack dealers do so and had to leave, right? So, we need to have men's training programs. Real men, huh? Real men. That was my first comment. My second comment is on community well-being teams. I like the part here with protect the children, the elderly, disabled persons, and the needy. I work with two organizations. One is called Hope for Children. And by the way, I was national at one time, but now I'm in Christchurch South, right? So, it's the Hope for Children. We have free literacy programs at Foundation School because there was a need for it, right? We're trying to have something more on child abuse and child exploitation because what we're finding is that there's an increase in child abuse, especially child sexual abuse and exploitation. And so when you look at number 2, community well-being, you must address the issue of that child abuse and exploitation. Last thing, through the other organization, the INU Institute, we have a lot of adult functional fitness programs. Not to be fit, but to be functional. Can you wash your clothes? Can you do this? So all those, it's not just fitness, but it's what we call functional fitness, okay? And that deals with gerontology. Number 4, you mentioned about youth education and social development. I think that should all be encapsulated within human development. Human development in all spectrums from adolescence to adulthood to older adult. We have to look at human development. If we look at developing people, communities will develop. So those kind of initiatives are things that we definitely must look at. I think there's one last comment here, yeah. One last comment. Number 10, a people's cooperative. You mentioned a community-based cooperative business project, food production farm. Love it. I was trying to get what we call a food forest all across the island. There's nowhere that if we can't get food coming in from overseas, that we gotta starve. You must, one of the most crucial elements of self-preservation is food security. And I don't talk, we need to get rid of this GMO seeds. We need to grow seeds that are heirloom seeds. If we're gonna plant 1 million trees, let me have at least 750,000 of them to be fruit trees. Huh? I won't eat. All right. Yeah, exactly. No. So to finish that concept off again, I am all for anything that develops communities, builds people, and that's it. Now, one last thing. No, seriously. One last thing. One last thing. Hold me to this one. I have an event next week, Thursday, at Solidarity House. And I chose Solidarity House because it turns solidarity. And we need solidarity in the community. We need to increase the peace, violence, and crime must also cease. So this is an event that we're having. The Annual Institute is going to be Thursday, December 12th at 5:30 at Solidarity House. What it is, I want all grassroots activists to come out and let's look at solving problems together, okay? So we're going to break off into plenary groups. We're going to talk issues about health, and NCDs, the non-communicable chronic diseases. We're going to look at agriculture. We're going to talk about crime. We're going to talk about gender, about violence and the domestic abuse, a couple of things. But we must look at the problems that we have as a society. We cannot wait for nobody to crack the sky and come through and save us. Nobody is saving us. You got to save yourself. So my thing is this. The event, I'm inviting everybody here, and especially grassroots activists, to come out and let's look at solving problems together. Talk shops is okay, but we need some workshops.
Thank you for
Please,
your
blessings.
comments. I definitely agree with most of what you would have said, in particular with us getting back the community spirit. And that involves us being able to teach our young person something we have not embodied in ourselves, because we are the ones we're complaining about. If the majority of Barbados is seen as not having a community spirit, then the majority is us. If it was just a few, it would not be a problem. But the fact that it has become an endemic issue means that we have to examine where we've gone wrong and to make sure that the younger persons coming up under us don't pick up our bad habits and continue this generational issue. So hopefully under the educational area, this will be something that the People's Assemblies can address in terms of coming up with programs that can be implemented at the primary and tertiary level that will bring back that sense of community spirit. David.
Thanks, Madam Chairperson. First, I would like to say good night. My name is David Denny, and I'm very happy that the government of Barbados have given us an opportunity to participate in a process that will help us to develop local councils and new positions for governance. But what I would like to say first is that I think that this commission should not be a commission on local government. It should be the Thorne Commission on Governance in Barbados. Because honestly, I think that we need to seriously look at governance in Barbados from the executive right down to what we consider to be local government. And I think that if we do that, it will create the conditions for local government to have some kind of strong political power. Because you don't want to create the conditions for local government and it becomes just a community group just functioning and getting a subvention from government and you're not giving the people of Barbados serious political power that they can create the conditions for their own development. So that I think that we should look seriously at the reforming of our parliamentary systems in Barbados. I think we should look also at the reforming of how we determine how boards are selected in terms of sanitation and transport board. I think that there should be a system where the people can participate in determining who become the board of directors within these corporations, and that's what I'm saying, that we should broaden the scope in terms of governance in Barbados. When we look at local government, each assembly should be able to determine the conditions and should be able to determine the way forward for that geographical area. When we look at housing, when we look at health, when we look at education, when we look at the social services, I think that community council should have some kind of political power to determine the directions for that community. And then that community council should feed in to what I consider to be a national council, where every community council will have representation on a national assembly or a national council, whatever you want to call it. The name is not important. I think the process is important, and the idea of empowering the people is what is important to all of us. And that national assembly should then be able to feed in to our national parliament in Barbados, so that that national assembly can represent in a true way the real feelings and can really put forward the ideas coming from the people from the bottom right up to the top, rather than just having a political party running a candidate and representing a constituency and having branch meetings with only party people, and then the party people making the recommendations at the branch meeting level or making the recommendation at the party level. I think if we honestly want to transform the society to empower the people, we have to create a people's process where the people can put forward recommendations from the bottom and it comes up right up to the top, like how you build or construct a house, okay, to the parliament. My final statement also, in relation to this, I think that we will also have to create the condition for Barbados to become a republic. And the reason for saying this here is because we cannot honestly.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think the issue of a republic is a bit wider than the scope for the People's Assembly discussion at this point. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying it might be out of the scope for this discussion.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is that if you want us to just look at a local government system only in terms of empowering the people, I think we are failing the people. Okay? If you want to empower the people, you have to empower them where they create the conditions for them, where they can be empowered from the bottom right up to the top. And you cannot be calling yourself a nation state, a sovereign state, and you're reporting, okay? And you're reporting to the Queen every week.
Thank you.
You must be honest.
I definitely appreciate your
You must be
comments,
honest,
and
but
I'm
you must
not
be honest
saying
with
you're
yourself.
wrong. I'm just saying this is not the forum, unfortunately.
Okay, but well, you know that I have certain beliefs and certain
I know your
principal
beliefs.
positions, and therefore I will say what I have to say.
I know.
But I hope I am not disrespecting you. But
You're not disrespecting, but we do have to keep the focus. There are other persons who do want to talk, and we're running out of time.
Okay.
We can't spend the time on areas that are not relevant to the People's Assembly. I apologize for that.
I accept your position, but I think what I may have to do is to try to write a paper to explain in detail why I think that these ideas are very important for us to be able to move forward. Because I don't think we can move forward without dealing with these issues that we are afraid of. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, David.
Good evening. My name is Mary Thompson, and I am happy for the opportunity to speak.
Sorry, I missed your name.
Sorry, Mary Thompson.
Thank you.
And I am happy for the opportunity to speak in such a forum. I am not sure in my mind if I fully support this idea in terms of these assemblies, because when I look at where we are right now as a country, one, I am thinking of the resources that is needed to run these councils, assemblies, whatever you choose to call them. And I wonder if we are not reproducing the wheel. If you look at Barbados right now, we have so many faith-based organizations, NGOs, community-based organizations, and I wonder if we are not spreading ourselves thin as opposed to building capacity, and if we couldn't revisit the idea in terms of strengthening the capacity of these already established organizations, whether they be charities, the local charities, the amount of community-based structure that we have. If we have so many dots on the ground, and I think that we need to do some connecting of those dots. That's my view in terms of the assemblies. But the two things that I wanted to address this evening and make a plea for is that the faith-based organizations, and I am not talking religion now, I am speaking faith-based organizations. A lot of the people in our communities attend churches, and in those churches there are a plethora of resources available to us. And I'm wondering if we are really capitalizing. The question is always asked, what is the church doing? But have the church been given the opportunity, or have they come forward? I know that some might not have been there present and accounted for, but I still think that there is room for us to tap in to the faith-based organizations to address some of the challenges that we face as a nation. And the one issue that I think the church can really help with is in addressing this whole issue of gender-based violence. And I speak specifically to the systemic failure that exists in our judicial system when we have persons being charged with a crime and being on the run, or being free, not on the run, being free, and the evidence is gathered, and I am speaking, two things are in my mind right now. We're having persons who have committed an offense outside, and I am speaking specifically, I'm not talking about murder because I expect the judicial system to handle that, but the things that affect family in terms of domestic violence, gender-based violence, sexual assault. If a cadre of the resources from a church cannot be assembled together and used to try these cases in a community-based setting with an element of confidentiality and protection, offering counseling for the survivors, counseling for the perpetrators, because that is needed, because if they're permitted to continue to roam, they will reoffend. And what are we doing with those who have been freed because the survivors no longer want to offer evidence? It does not mean that they will not perpetrate again. So we have some person out there on the loose who have the potential to do it again, and that is a gap in our system that needs to be addressed. And I think pulling from our faith base to set up so that because of the overload in court based on the family issues, that they can be tried in a setting that mimics what this council or assembly seek to think. And I think that that is something that has to be given consideration.
Thank you for your comments. I definitely agree with the idea. I do think the church has an important voice, a very important voice, but I do not think they're the only authority on morals, values, ethics, or gender relations in Barbados. So I would like to have a cohesive cooperation going forward for that particular issue. Not sure if my colleagues want to comment?
Sorry, no. Okay. Just a quick comment. You began by mentioning about, or to say, identifying your concern about spreading the few resources that we have quite thin. But I just want to say that a lot of empowerment of citizens can happen in a very inexpensive way, just at the stroke of a pen. An example that comes to mind: the local councils in, I believe it's Guadeloupe and Martinique, insisted that all town planning applications be identified with a sign in front of the person's house. Okay, so this speaks to Mr. Beckel's contribution when he talks about what happened at the Paradise Heights. Whether you're a business or an individual and you are applying to build a house, a business, the sign is erected at the front. It says the town planning application number, it says the name of the officer, the name of the person applying, etc. What that does is it gives the people in the area the opportunity to inquire, dispute, etc. This does not necessarily cost anything, but it's a form of empowerment. It was insisted on by their equivalent of what we're proposing as people's assemblies. And I believe in the French Caribbean that is what obtains.
Oh, the French Caribbean is amazing. My name is Elaine Van Heijs. I'm a returning national. My original name was Elaine Reed, but I'm Elaine Van Heijs now. I'm a returning national, a recent returning national. And only today I was in Bridgetown, and it dawned on me that the majority of Barbadians aren't being served. And even before I came back here, I would always on Facebook say that people's voice, we don't realize how powerful we are. So therefore, when I saw, and I remember that my cousin had sent me the information about this meeting, and I said, I want to go to that meeting because I'm really on board with you guys, really creating community voice. Because we are really powerful folk. Those government, there's only a few people. You know how many of us there are? A lot. So therefore, we need to empower ourselves. So I'm really appreciative of this. I also like what that young man said about having the small meetings and coming together and getting people to understand how to impart. I like everything all the young people say, because to me, those young people, look, I'm 72 years old, and those young people and me can communicate. I can't communicate with the old people because they don't hear me, but those young people hear me. Barbados need a different voice, and I'm hoping that these kind of communities, this kind of meeting can create that kind of voice. That, you talk about a lot of things that I talk, I get in the bus and I see the infirm and all those people struggling on a bus. Now in America, you have buses that go to the house and make sure those people are taken care of. Why are they struggling on the public buses? The majority of Barbadians aren't being served. Barbados is serving the upper middle class, the people that live in the big houses and drive in the cars. But the people like me who choose, and this is a choice, I choose to ride the buses. I can afford a car, but I choose the bus. I don't have no way, gotta go. So, but the majority, how many thousands of people in Barbados depend upon the bus system, and they're not being served. So we need something in Barbados that is going to be serving the majority of Barbadians. And I am really, really grateful to see this thing. And I'm praying that it can become something more than just talk, but action.
Thank you for your comments. I hope that persons recognize what you said is important, that the people are critical to this working. If we have assemblies that are filled with persons who do not want to do any work, they will not work. If they're filled with people who are passionate and want to see change in Barbados, who are not just interested in having their bills paid, then there will be something. This is heavily dependent on good people who love their country stepping forward and serving.
Good evening. My name is Eric Smith.
Not Eric Lewis.
Another person. First of all, I made a few recommendations to the commission, but I did it out of kind of plucking it out of the sky. I thought that one of the weaknesses in the start to this process was the lack of a green paper. I mean, I got here tonight and I got a paper, so I was guessing while I wrote my brief presentation. I was overseas, and I felt that there ought to have been a green paper, and then coming out of this process, the government would have a white paper where you have the input of the public. But be that as it may. And based on something I think Mr. Becker said, and then a few other people, the issue of the legal issues. I'm wondering, for the assembly members, who will indemnify them? Pardon me?
Davron's being cheeky. So continue.
I'm wondering who will indemnify them in cases where legal action is brought against an assembly. I also feel, Mr. Becker's raised the issue of the ombudsman. I feel the office of the ombudsman cannot serve the assemblies. The office of the Solicitor General, I don't believe, will best serve the interests of the assemblies either. And the DPP's office is there for something completely different. So I believe that we need an office of a public defender, as is the case in Jamaica. It is the expanded version of the ombudsman, because there are going to be a number of instances where people in various communities, whether it is the issue of poor service, the national insurance, or wherever, people are going to be looking for answers and redress to their problems and concerns, which the legal aid will not provide. So having an effective public defender who can defend people where they feel there have been injustices brought by government or government agencies, I think that that is something the Commission this commission ought to look at rather seriously. Now, in my view and my submission to the commission, I, perhaps being age biased, I felt that the commission, the members of the assemblies or whatever you want to call them, should not be under 18 and above 85. So I gave an age range. And why I said 85? Because I think at 85, most people would want to retire from having done their public service or whatever. I mean, it is only exceptions where some people, lawyers and so forth, doctors, may work until 90. For the as I said, I had to work with pulling things out of the sky. So I went with the 20 that I heard announced by the Prime Minister and subsequently by the Chairman in terms of the number of assemblies. But my difference was that I didn't feel that it should be in parishes. I felt that there are certain geographical and economic spaces in Barbados where we have to pay special attention. For instance, the expanding Warrens area. And when I say Warrens, Warrens include Welches, it includes all the surrounding areas. And if you had 8 special authorities, so let's say Oyston, 6 Roads, these places, and you had about 20,000 people per authority, that is 160,000 people. And then you leave with 12 other areas, whether you call them wards, whether you call them whatever, councils, whatever. So you have perhaps another 120,000 people, which breaks down to about 10,000 people each. So I move away, in my view, from having anything to do with constituency boundaries. I also feel that the people elected should be for a 3-year period and not at the same time as we have national elections. I read something where a former officer, I believe, of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission was talking to the logistical headaches. But I believe in other jurisdictions, you have the equivalent of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission dealing with numerous local government and national elections. So I don't think that should be a problem. The question of funding and accountability, I think this is critical. These proposed assemblies must be governed by statute. They must be held accountable. I don't feel that ICAB should be coming in to do something pro bono or out of good intention. They must be legislated, because somebody here who is connected with ICAB or the internal auditors or whoever may not be here 5 years from now. They may leave the jurisdiction. So we have to have entrenched proper procedures. And I believe that the Auditor General's Department is perhaps the best agency. It might need more staffing, but it might be the best agency to ensure that there's accountability.
The Auditor General's Office who is proposed to be used is just ICAB has also volunteered to assist and not necessarily to take over, but to make sure that there is support.
No, I don't believe that the assemblies should be accountable to any MPs. I believe they should work in collaboration with, if they can be, because you're working towards certain objectives, but they should not be subservient or answerable to any MPs. They should be answerable, if anything, to one ministry, whatever ministry that they're accountable to. The meetings should be opened to the public, because not everything the members of the assemblies will be aware of, whether it is the bushing issue, whether it is a busing issue or so forth. So whether that meeting is monthly, bi-monthly, whatever, that can be, those logistics can be sorted out. But the assembly should be accountable to the constituents. I don't agree that an assembly should have 30 people. Experience will show that if you look at PTA meetings, councils, if you look at various bodies across Barbados, 10 people are going to be working, not 30. They're going to come to the meetings. So I am I am against 30 people or whatever.
You don't think that these subcommittees would help with that particular issue? Because I understand where you're coming from, but given the number of functions, you don't think that if you had subcommittees that are responsible for these particular functions, where it would lessen the number of persons?
But you may need to draw on the talent and the experience. There may be people in this geographical area here, in Wanstead, people with experience, HR, industrial relations, a whole set of expertise within that you may want to draw on for specific things. So I think that may be one approach, but I am weary of big assemblies because they will start out big and people will not attend. Now the funding, I think that people who are on the assembly should be given, even if it is the honorarium. And I tell you why. They have to come to, there must be some central point where they have to go to have these meetings. It's going to cost them in terms of gas and so forth. You cannot only expect goodwill. Yeah, there are a lot of people who are involved with service clubs and a whole set of things who do it on a voluntary basis. But this is another tier of government. If you're paying the parliamentarians at the national level, if you're paying the senators, if you're paying people on statutory boards who sometimes don't even know what they're doing, you can give the members of the assembly an honorarium because they're gonna have to cover transportation, and you have to prepare. I mean, I don't expect members of the assembly to just turn up. I think they have to be prepared. They have to understand the laws. They have to understand the community. They have to understand things related to the town planning department. So there are a number of things that will cost them. The other issue that I would like for the assemblies to pay a lot of attention to, young people, yes, but senior citizens. There are a number of people in Barbados who have to care for their elderly folks. Not everybody can get into the geriatric hospital or can afford to go to a senior citizen's home. And we, as a society with an aging population, we need to pay a lot more attention to how we care for these people. So we have to work, I feel, with the churches and the service clubs and so forth to find solutions, whether it is their care services or whatever. And I think a lot of emphasis has to be placed on that as well. The other thing of import to me is to ensure that these assemblies do not become highly partisan bodies. It is, I don't know if you did a kind of survey tonight, or some quietly, to see how many people who support, for instance, the Democratic Labour Party are here tonight. Because they may see it as running counter and contrary to what their party stood for. And we need, if we are going to develop our communities, to ensure that we can cut across the political divide.
We have 3 minutes left, but how do you propose that we counter that?
Well, I think you have to ensure that from the outset, the first set of assemblies when people look at the assemblymen and women, that they can say, you know something, I know this person is not there based on his or her party allegiance. It is going to be a trying, it's going to be an issue that will be challenging, but the commission, in its wisdom, will have to make the appropriate recommendations. Okay. Otherwise, it will destroy the whole thing. It will become, you know, the dams did one thing, and now the bees do something else. Given somebody else wants to get a chance, but those are the few points that I would make at this time.
Good night. My
Good
name
night.
is Roseanne Richards, and yes, my name is Roseanne Richards, and I had at least 2 questions, but I think they were touched already. One was the involvement of the assemblies and the recognized NGO organizations in Barbados, and what role the church would play. But the other question that I don't think has been touched is what mechanism will be in place to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the assembly. So if after a year and nothing is happening, how do we either amend, change, restructure to get an effective assembly functioning? Sure. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Basically, my name is Carolyn Williams-Gale. I live in Oxnard, and I'm in agreement with the need for having people's assemblies, and people expect, the expectation right now is that people want government to solve all of their problems, right? And people in Barbados, we have lost a sense of community mindedness. Yes. And in terms of what, I forget your name again. I didn't get your name.
My name is Lane.
Lane, right? And a number of persons would have said, in terms of what is happening, or a number of things I heard, a lot of things are happening in silos, right? And in terms of my understanding, when I read the original proposal document, it is, okay, how do we move to empower our communities so that we, as the members of this country, what can we do to make our nation better through our communities? And that's how I see these people assemblies, right? And so I'm in agreement with the formation of the people assemblies. I'm in agreement with most of, or nearly everything that Eric would have proposed. And because it's essentially about decentralizing the decision making for the country, right? And in terms of what people want to see and what people want to see happen, because the other expectation is that when a representative for a constituency is elected, then the expectation is also that that person will also solve the problems for the area, for the parish, or whatever it is that that's the expectation that people have. People would have mentioned earlier about the previous constituency councils, and that the expectation was that you go to get money to pay off bills or whatever the case may be. But the Prime Minister would have said in her independence speech, and I think that is a call for all of us in this nation to look and see how we can improve the nation, and not look just to government, but how we as individuals and collectively as communities, but we need to also get back to a state of community spiritedness and community mindedness, because we have become very, very individualistic. Right? And people just look and see, okay, this is my house, this is my boundary, and I don't know what to do there. For me, like Mr. Gibbs, in my community, we have a group and we work together relative to cleaning up things, looking out for the elderly in our neighborhood, and so on. And we're trying to expand it a bit more, because it was a collective in a certain area, but we're trying to widen it more as it relates to our neighborhood. Because we see certain things happening, we see certain elements, we recognize when people are passing through the neighborhood, and all of a sudden you just hear your phone ping, 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 look out. Right? It was to a point where people held a person until the police came. So, well, he's gone. But we have that sort of community mindedness within our community in Oxnard, or it has started, I must say, because we would have had the community, the neighborhood watches before, and the neighborhood watches, they were a really big thing when I was much, much younger, and then they just disappeared. And then you have 1 or 2 people, and so you have people moving from neighborhoods constantly. So one of the things, as I said, the most important point is about community spiritedness and getting to know the people in your neighborhood, right? Because without that, these will not work well. Because it is about devolving the decision making. But you have to know who is around you. And as Eric said, it could be small, it may be a need for more assemblies and smaller groups, right? Because you don't necessarily want to be doing everything outside of a particular area. But those are just the 2 or 3 points. And well, I was having a discussion and she made the point that I was also going to make relative to the assemblies are about planning. What is it that we want to achieve? Because there are limited resources, whether it's people, finances, or agencies. And it's what can we get from these agencies based on their limited resources as well, and how can we use them for effectiveness, right? Because it's about efficiency and effectiveness. That ultimately, those I see are the aims of these people's assemblies, to help the public service, and as Elaine would have said, and somebody else would have mentioned, service, so in terms of even transformation for the public service itself, that also has to occur, because that has to happen in tandem with these people's assemblies being effected. Because if these people's assemblies have to have representation from various public sector agencies, they also have to have a civic mindedness relative to serving the people, right? So in order for any change to happen or any transformation to happen, it has to happen at multiple levels and happen simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Unfortunately, we have gone over the time, and I do apologize for that, but this discussion was extremely robust, diverse, and spirited, so I appreciate the feedback, the comments, the questions, the suggestions from every one of you, and I appreciate the time you took to come out tonight. Not sure if my colleagues have anything to add, but we'll give them the opportunity to do so at this time, quickly.
1 minute. Good night. My name is Natalie Murray, and I am in total support of the People Assemblies. I just want to ask one question. Will there be training for the People Assemblies? Because you will be handling money, the People Assemblies will be doing projects so that you will not end up in doing the same thing that occur right now in some government agencies. I want to know if there will be training for the members of the People Assemblies, because these people assemblies.
I 100% endorse there being training so that people are not operating at random and they understand what they're expected to do. They'll be given input, but definitely I endorse training.
Okay, thank you.
But I join with my colleagues in congratulating all those who would have spoken tonight. You would have heard a great deal, but the point should be made that the success or the failure of the People's Assembly or this process cannot be determined by the 12 members who constitute the People's Assembly, but by you, the public of Barbados, you, the citizens, who will have the will to make a difference in the communities in which you live. I believe that for too long we've talked a lot, and now is the time for the process to be implemented. We very often as well too we lambaste our parliamentary representatives and our politicians, and I continue to ask the question: why is it so demonic about politicians? I mean they come from among us. We elect them every 5 years to deliver service. And if they fail to do so, the power is within us to fire them at the ending of a 5-year term. And we come to these deliberations and speak very negatively about them. And we heard 2 young men tonight articulate very outstandingly some of what they will want to see happen in their communities. And I would like to think that they too might have some political aspirations. So what happens then when they're elected to serve as politicians? Are we going to lambaste them as well too? So the point is we have it within our power to act, rather than come to the table and talk about all of the concerns that we have as a people. But what are we going to do in the communities in which we live? We as a people must act and implement a lot of the things that we would have heard, a lot of the papers and suggestions that we ourselves bring to the table. So the People's Assembly will not be a success unless we have the will to put some of what we suggest into action. And we often talk about people who lives in poverty. And I said to a gentleman a couple of years ago, there's nothing that will legislate an individual who has tremendous wealth and refuse to contribute back to the development of his community. There's only X amount of money that you can spend. There's only X amount of food to which you can eat. There's only X amount of space that you have at your disposal in terms of a house. When you have 4 bedrooms in a house, what is your responsibility to an individual who's living without a shelter over his head? What sort of discussion are we going to have in relation to these things? How can we who have wealth contribute back to those who don't have the opportunity to do so? And there's no legislative framework that can address those issues. There's no town hall meeting that can address those issues. So we as a people must act and make a desired opportunity to deliver services to our people and to act towards the goodwill of the communities in which we live. And we can't be dependent on government to do it alone.
I just want to say that, I actually found the contributions, the discussions, intellectually stimulating. I'm really glad, and I'm up here and I would have equally been happy to be in the audience. I think it seems, at least from the contributions, that we agreed on the why we need to do this. It just is the how that we need to work out. Being able to assert our democratic rights once every 5 years and keep quiet in between, that's not working. That's insufficient. Okay. So thank you for coming, and I just hope we can work out the how.
Each town hall meeting we have had so far has been different. Discussions have been different, and ideas have been different. But it all boils down to one thing, that everybody is supportive of a local governance. That we've seen. There'll be opportunity for those who've got so many ideas that whenever the time for elections come around, you should be able to serve on the assemblies to bring your ideas into fruition, not only talk. So thank you very much for coming tonight. It's been very helpful to the commission, and we hope that we can bring it to, we can come to an end soon. I think we're going to have about 16 more town hall meetings, so it's going to take a while before the cabinet decides that what they're going to pass. But it has to go to the cabinet to be ratified. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, and I remind you to look out in the new year for the future communications about the remaining town halls. Have a very blessed night.
Crystal,